This is part 2 of molding and casting Sarah's sculpture, and this is where we left off from last week. So you can see the clay is still stuck to the inside of the shell, and that's all going to have to be cleaned off. But otherwise, the sculpture's in great shape, ready to go for making a mold. So the challenge is to get all this clay out from this shell. And it was really mostly just scraping and pulling and elbow grease. There's no magic formula for how to do it. And it took quite a while, because oil clay does tend to stick to things, and it certainly stuck to the inside of those shells. So I just scraped and cut and pulled and worked it until I got it down to this point, and then I thought maybe a quick way to get the rest of it off would be with a heat gun. So I gave that a try, and it worked okay. It wasn't bad. It certainly made it quicker than just trying to rub it off without any help. But then I hit on a much better way to do it, and that was with paint thinner. The paint thinner, a well-soaked rag and paint thinner, and it just dissolved the clay, the oil clay, right off. Quick and easy. I want to make sure that the rubber does not stick or comes off easily from the inside of those mother shells. So I got them all coated in beeswax, and they are ready to go. They're cleaned, they are waxed, as you saw, and they are sprayed with mold release. We are just not going to have that rubber stick to these shells. Now, the other thing I did was I put 3 little registration pins that you can see there, and you'll see why I did that in a second. What we're going to do now is to assemble these cases around this figure to make sure that these shells do not leak. That would be a major disaster if they leaked. We're going to gasket them. And the best thing to gasket a silicone rubber mold with is silicone rubber. It's just the easiest thing to do. Right now we're just going to put a gasket on the bottom. And this is going to help to make sure that this thing does not leak. When we start to pour a few pounds of rubber in here, we don't want this thing leaking. And I didn't want to be fumbling around looking for these holes here. I just wanted to set it right in place, and hopefully my location pins will give me exactly, see how that sat right down in there? It can really only go in one way. Let us see if it finds these holes right away. I'll be going around and around the part. Okay, so now that's that. Now what we do is we brush gasket material on the edges of the mold. Again, this is all about keeping this mold from leaking out of these edges. Okay, now we can gasket the bottom of this boy. You don't want too thick a gasket, otherwise it'll shift everything out of alignment, make it very hard to get everything to line up. You just want enough that you create a seal, and you've hopefully stopped most of the leaks. You may have some pin leaks and things, but hopefully not too much. Let's see, can this go into place? Let's see, should just fall in neatly and neat and sweet, neat and sweet. Okay, neat and sweet. Let's see if it finds the holes, shall we? Let's see if it finds its holes. Found that one. Found that one. All right, now let's begin, because we want to do everything simultaneously. We want everything to fit simultaneously. So that means we've got to do the bolts along with the screws all at the same time. Everything coming together at the same time. If all of these things go back together exactly like they were when the clay blanket was on, then I'll know that the silicone blanket will be identical to the clay blanket. And I know I engineered that correctly. At least I hope I did. Keep it coming. All right, you get it. I'm gonna go around, I'm gonna tighten everything up, get it all locked down, and then this thing will be ready to pour. The mold came together just about as perfectly as I could have hoped. And you can see the flange where the screws or the bolts are holding the whole thing together. It's all gasketed up. I filled in all of the seam lines with silicone rubber. Here's the pour spout right there. You can see the sculpture living down inside the mold. So all the rubber is going to pour in that funnel. It's going to vent out of the same hole. I'm very optimistic. I think that the tubes, all three tubes slid right into position perfectly. There's just no resistance at all, which told me the two shells were in perfect position because they fit tight and they just slid together almost with a precise fit. So pretty pleased. Let's let this gasket material set up and then let's pour some rubber. I put the mold down on the floor to make it easier for me to pour this thing. What I want to do is I want to run the rubber straight down behind the arm and drop it all the way to the bottom. So this is the first layer that's going to seal up around the feet. So we're literally just going to dump it in and let it flow down there. Needless to say, it's going to take quite a number of pours, but I'm going to let them each pour settle between pours. So it all just flows around and has flattened itself out before I pour a subsequent pour. So this is going to be poured in a fairly large number of pours. This is where you really have to trust your mold case design and your whole scheme, because I can't see what's going on down inside that mold. I have to trust that that rubber is running down to the bottom and is going to run around successfully all the way around the bottom and fill that mold. I'm going on faith and on design. You saw me pour the first layer of rubber into the mold, but I'm going to spare you the fun of watching me pour the other 8 layers and instead just show you the containers that were left over. Now, obviously, I didn't fill these containers. It didn't take that much rubber, but you got to leave a lot of room in the container for expansion. Nonetheless, no doubt, this mold is the largest single mold that we have poured on this channel to date. But we got it filled and topped off. I took out all the screws and bolts that held this thing together. Now we're going to see if we can take this thing apart. And the first step in that process is, will these tubes come out like they did last time fairly easily or not? Or are they much more tightly held? Looks like they are going to be harder to remove than the last time. The rubber's got a nice grip on it. All right, well, we'll have to see about getting those out. Let's see about putting in some wedges. The shells themselves should come apart fairly easily, he says, laughing. We don't know if they will, but they should. We're going to try. Got the wood wedges going. Seam is coming undone. It's always a war to take apart big molds. It's always a challenge to get them to come apart. It's going to come off the rubber easily because it's so well waxed. I'm not sure that it will come apart until I can drive those things out of there. There it goes. Give me a heavy bladed screwdriver. I'll just tap that thing through. Is that out enough? Ooh. Come on, baby. Go on out. There we go. There it goes. Yeah, we need to take these. We need to take these out because this is not going to come apart. And so what's needed is loving, gentle persuasion. Go, you. Go on. That's out. Okay. Beautiful. And now we should be able to tap this out. Ah, there it goes. Easier to pound it out the other way. It wants to come out. It just isn't doing it. There it comes. There it comes. Whew, that was fun. I think that was what was holding all this together. Let's find out. Come on, baby. Come on, darling. Come on out of there. Time to come out. It's time to come apart. Oh, it is time to come apart. There we go. There's the backside. You guys get a look at it before I even get to see it. How we look at, oh man. Look at that boy. Whew, that felt perfect. What a relief that is, huh? I was afraid that thing wasn't gonna fill properly. Come on, baby. Come on, baby. I gotta get out this section now. There we go. Come on. No messing around. No time to be funny. Come on. Trying to figure out what is locking this in. It looks like it's being locked in here. There's nothing locking it in. Just need to lift it out of there. There we go. Wowee. Oh, Lord. Wow, that was that was some work, huh? That was, in fact, some work. We've got our work cut out for us still, boys and girls. We've got to cut this model free out of this big, giant, heavy blanket of rubber. But the hole's cast exactly as planned. There is not a bubble in sight. It could not have cast more perfectly. I can't be more pleased with it. Let me tell you something, it's always a war to pull a big mold apart with big shells. I've never in my life had them just fall open. Usually it's a war, and like this was. But this mold came out perfectly. Now we just need to make sure that the real mold, which is inside of here, when we cut this guy out, comes out perfectly. And if it does, we're golden. We're gonna make good castings. All right, time is at hand to cut this mold open. This is a hybrid mold. It's got a clayed up body, but it's going to be a cut mold. And the reason that it's going to be a cut mold is the cut molds leave the cleanest parting lines. We're going to not cut up at the top because this is going to be the bottom of the mold. So this is what the area that's going to not get cut. So this is what's going to hold the whole mold together. First thing we have to do is, well, we can go around. Can you see what I'm doing here? We can go around and start just cutting off the flange like that. Okay, then we'll come in here. Cut the flash. Cut the flash, and finally cut the flash like that. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut, we're just gonna peel this off in one neat, continuous seam. Just like that. And that is the cut line. That's what the line that I'm going to cut down. Can you see that? That's the line that I'm going to cut down. I got to say, man, that was neat and sweet. Let's pull this and let's do the same thing up top. We want to come, if we can, in a continuous line. Nice. All right, now you see it. There's our cut. There's our main cut lines right there. What we're going to do next is we're going to fit the shell on there, back on in place like that. And remember, early on in the project, I told you that this flange was a temporary structure. Now you see why. It can all go away. It can all be cut away. And then the rubber bands will hold the shell on nice and tight. Oh yeah. It's all gonna go away. All right, let's keep going. Let's get these sharp edges off of these holes. This is no good because that will cut rubber bands and fingers. So we're going to need to sand those off. And I just bought this little sanding sleeve. Works perfect for the job. Let's do it. Come in from the inside. And that's really about all you need, just to go and round it off. Then I just finish it with a little bit of sandpaper, just to get any sharp edges off of there. And that's what we're going to do. And we'll go through and get all of them done just like that. And then we're ready to go. It's time to cut this mold open. And to do it, I am going to be referring to my iPad. If you'll recall, I marked out all the cut lines with tape on the model in anticipation of this very moment when I would need these photographs to guide me in making these blind cuts. So let's get going. We're going to start from the bottom. Okay, here we go. And what do? We cut jagged away from the model and clean at the model. The hardest part of doing any cut mold is the beginning. It's always hard to begin. I'm just going to make jagged cuts all the way up. You notice I'm making jagged cuts, but I'm not going crazy with my cuts. And we come back into here. And then as I'm coming close to the model, as I am here, I'm going to cut clean and straight as much as I can. This rubber is just coming off the model beautifully. And then I'm going to have to come down from here, again, looking at my photographs. So this is just going to be a long, slow process of cutting down to the model. And then as I get to the model, I will try to cut as straight and clean a line as I possibly can. This mold was difficult to cut, and parts of it I missed on camera, mostly because I had a difficult time getting you to be able to see cutting down in those wells of those holes. It's very difficult because I had my hands down in there for you to see anything. But as you can see, I cut nice jagged planes across the hole surfaces. So I cut those donuts out. And I did want to show you one more thing. Sometimes when you cut a mold, you have to search around and you kind of go and you get the feeling you're going in the wrong direction and you make ragged cuts that look like this. If you do that, don't get bummed out. Don't get sad about that because that's not going to hurt anything. Those cuts will close up, and the worst thing that can happen to you is you're going to get a little tiny bit of flash in there. So that's not a problem. Same with like here, I did that again. You see, look how many times I had to search. It was so hard for me to see where I was going, to make sure I was going in the right direction, that I made these kind of exploration cuts almost. Again, these are not fatal. Not only are they not fatal, they don't really hurt the mold much. It's not going to be a problem. So this mold is looking good. Let's take a look at the entire mold. Let's take the figure out. Figure is undamaged, came out clean. Come on, come on, come on out. There we go. Nonetheless, there were a couple of places where I did cuts that I'm not crazy about, and I'm going to show you one. And this is kind of, one of the most difficult parts and one of the liabilities of a cut mold. And this is where the mother shell is going to help us. See this kind of long projection of rubber that sits right in here? That is not ideal. This is a place where this rubber is pretty much unsupported and could be a place where there's going to be a flaw in the casting. Now we're going to try to close it up well, close the joint up together well, and hope that the mother shell and the rubber bands will close it, and it'll make only a minor bit of cleanup in the final casting. Otherwise, let's look at the surface of that mold. It's pretty pristine. You notice there is not a flaw or a bubble or anything in sight. It's just absolutely clean. I'm reasonably confident that Sarah is going to be able to make good castings from this mold. So here's another example of when I say I did an exploration cut and I didn't like where it was going, so I changed directions. Again, not fatal to the mold. It'll be okay. And I want to make one more final point. This is a one-piece mold. You'll notice I did not cut the entire mold apart. I left the bottom of the mold. That's going to be the bottom of the mold when I fill it. I left that uncut. So A, it can't leak, and B, that section of the mold that holds the two halves together is the thing that's going to register these halves together. If you cut the mold completely apart, you just have such a hard time getting the mold to fit back together perfectly. That's why they're called one-piece cut molds, because you don't ever cut a rubber mold into multiple pieces. You can see that I have the mold all nicely rubber banded up. I use little S-hooks to connect rubber bands where they were too short, and now you see the whole point to those holes through the molds. That was the only way that I could think of to pull those areas tight. So you can see the holes doing their job in there and allowing me to connect, to close up all those long, thin elements, the arms, legs, etc., by using those holes. So we're ready to go. I got my resin, and I got brand new jugs of resin. The problem with this particular job is that Sarah has a pressure pot. As you'll recall, this mold is designed to fit perfectly inside her pressure pot. But I don't have a pressure pot anywhere near this big, so we're going to have to cast this thing no pressure, which means we're probably going to cast bubbles. So the first thing I did was go out and order from our friends at Silpack some Silcast 2, and it's brand new. It's never been opened, but I did want to show you this while we're thinking about it. It's hard to see, but here's the level of the B right up here, the B side, and here's the level of the A side. So you can see they're not at all even. The A weighs a lot more than the B, and that is why we have to measure by weight and not by volume. And to that end, my balance beam is not big enough to weigh the amount of resin we're going to be using here, so we're just going to have to use a little kitchen digital scale that I borrowed. I don't have a container big enough to weigh this and pour this in one shot, and I don't want to do it anyway because that would put a tremendous amount of pressure on the rubber band because of the weight of the resin opening the mold. So what we're going to do is we're going to pour it in shots. I don't know how many shots, but a bunch. And the beginning shots, the first couple of shots, are going to be smaller than the ones in the middle, because I want there to be a nice big plug of gelled resin at the bottom. That's going to hold that mold together. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take the weight and distribute the weight, and it's going to make it a lot harder for the subsequent pours to push the mold open. Starting with the A side, I'm in grams, ready to wipe the container. So I'm just going to guess based on how much I'm going to put in the cup. 345. I'll take 345. I can do the math on 345, so 690. And like I said, this first shot's going to be smaller. Now here's another trick for you. It's really hard to sneak up on a weight of resin when you're pouring it out of a big jug. So what I'm going to do is have some resin in the cup that I can control easily. 345 times 2 is 690, so let's dump to 620, 652, 660. Okay, so now I'm at 673, and this is what I'm going to switch to the little thing because I can easily control it. I can trickle it in. So 86, 87, 88, 89, 90. Perfect. Okay, perfect. This cup is pretty full, and it is already getting warm. We got to go, go, go. And it is a tall, thin cup. Boy, I'll tell you what, resin, when you pour it in this volume, it wants to go off. This resin will cure up. And this is silk cast. It's not fast cast. And mix for 15 or 20 seconds. It is getting hot right away. Very warm. Let's do this thing. Let's pour it. We don't have time. The good news is, this is a dump pour. There's absolutely nothing fancy about this pour. We just dump it, and I'm going to be very interested to see how much we leak down there on the bottom. Okay. Very good. Any leaking? Any leaking? Boy, I don't see any leaking. I'll tell you what. Those mold seams are pretty tight. Not bad. That was the first pour. I have no idea where it went to, how high it went. Just going to do more and more pours, as many as it takes. And I'll come back to you when I'm up near the top. But at long last, I'm mixing the final topping batch. Cavities are no longer connected to one another. They're separate cavities, in effect. This is the heel of that 1 foot. I'll just get it filled up right about there. And then we can just dump the rest of the resin into the other foot and get it filled up just right. Now I took the time to level this base and kind of prop it up nice and level. And so we get a pretty even bottom on each of these. This mold is full. Drank just a little bit of resin, huh? Let's see what we did here. Well, those jugs were full. It's a 2-gallon kit. It's probably, what, quarter of a gallon? Nah, maybe a third of a gallon each left. Yeah, that was a pretty good pour. Drank up some resin. All right, it looks like it did good. Now the question will be, what is this casting going to look like? I don't really know. I'm expecting that if we catch bubbles, well, it's going to be in the layer lines between the pores. That will be the most likely place where we might see lines of pin bubbles, in which case there's no solution other than to just patch them. But let's take this mold apart. It's amazing how fast resin in this mass cures. It is hot. This thing is hot. This mold is hot. I mean, it's hot to the touch. So it's pretty well cured. And we'll let it sit for a minute, and then we'll pull the whole thing apart and see what we get. I pulled off all the rubber bands and took video of all that, and it would have been really useful if I'd have turned the camera on, but I didn't. Oh well. So we are ready to go. Let's pop this thing apart. Should just come apart easy. I made sure that it would come off, and it did. That wax job really helped. The skins just come right off. I should take the back off first. Let's see. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, look at that. Okay. Wow. Oh, holy moly. Let's get this thing to come out. There you go. Oh man. Oh man, look at that. All right. Oh, nice. Check it out. Ooh, it's hot. Wow, it's hot. Wow, that thing is hot. Look at that mold. Look at that mold. Oh, that mold did its job. Perfect. All right, let's see how we did. Let's not get to gloating till we see how we did it. Let's just check it out. I like to put the blanket back into the mother because it helps it to hold its shape and not, there we go, and keep it clean. Pop it all back together. All right. Hey, this is the biggest mold by far and the biggest casting we've made by far on this channel. And it's been, I can tell you, an adventure. I have been working on this thing for a long time. But hey, let's check this casting out. We got to see this thing. Nice. Nice. I tell you, I'm seeing some of the layer lines from the pour where I said that I predicted if there was going to be little tiny bubbles. There are some minor layer lines, but interestingly, you only see a couple of them. And you hardly feel them. They're almost invisible. Let's look at our parting lines and our flash. Boy, there is minimal flash. Oh, wow, that is not bad. Not bad at all. Now, let's look at parting lines. Generally speaking, they're pretty minimal. Pretty small, light flash. Can you see? I don't know if you guys can even see. Can you see the line? The visible line right there? That's where a layer of resin, but then you don't see a lot of them. That is not bad because I'm thinking that Sarah's going to pour this thing in batches too. Now let's look at some parting lines over here. Okay, now this is so far the worst parting line I've found. That's a little misaligned. It's probably a 32nd or maybe a fat 32nd of an inch, but that'll all sand off. Some light flash here, no biggie, no problem. This parting line is a little bit of misalignment, and there's definitely a divot there. I must have chipped the mold or cut the mold. That's not good, but you know, none of these things are fatal. This is a usable casting. You can see how the first casting tends to clean out a mold. Boy, I tell you, I'm pretty pleased. I am pretty pleased. There are no major bubbles. I was very concerned about catching a bubble under the chin. I was almost considered venting it there. But I said, no, I can rock it. I'm pretty sure that I could rock it, and it cast really well. Let's compare the original with the casting. Look at that. Pretty good. I'm really pleased. This project has been a real odyssey. It's the largest single thing we made on the channel, and it's the biggest amount of resin I poured on the channel. I think we used up 1.5 gallons of resin at least in this thing. I'll weigh it and find out. Minimal flash, minimal cleanup. Really, really pleased with the result. Couldn't be happier. Wow, this project has been an odyssey. I gotta tell you, a lot of work went into this. But and there were a lot of places and a lot of stages where I was thinking, boy, I hope this works. But it just met my expectations. It's as good as I think you can expect it to be. Could it be perfect? No, it never is. But it's pretty darn good. And I'm really pleased with it. I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit that like button because it really does help the channel. And thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. I will see you next week.